Good afternoon. My name is Raheem Thompson. I am the Manager of Public Programs and Special Projects. On behalf of our CEO, Susan Abrams, Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers, I am honored to welcome each of you to today's program. The mission of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center is expressed in our founding principle, remember the past, transform the future. Is- The museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Holocaust by honoring the memories of those who are lost and by teaching universal lessons that combat hatred, prejudice, and indifference. This afternoon's Lunch and Learn, The Life and Legacy of Nelson Mandela, Robben Island, and the Nelson Mandela Capture Site will be presented by Christopher Till, who will share powerful insights into the incredible life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. We would like to thank our community partners who were listed on the screen prior to the start of the program. Christopher Till was educated at Hilton College and Rhodes University, where he obtained a master's degree in fine art. He began his career at the National Gallery of Zimbabwe in 1977, becoming the director in 1980 before serving as director of the Johannesburg Art Gallery from 1983 to 1991. During his tenure, he was responsible for several groundbreaking exhibitions, including the neglected tradition towards a new history of South African art. As Director of Culture for the City of Johannesburg from 1991 to 2001, he established the city's first cultural office and directed the formation of arts and cultural policy. He is the founding board member of the International Council of Museums Fine Art Committee and a member of the International Committee for Exhibitions and Exchange and chairman of the Cape Town Triennial Organizing Committee. Christopher is the founding and current director of the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, where he organized exhibitions on Nelson Mandela, Steve Biko, Oliver Tambo, and the Women's March, among many others. He is also the principal driver in the development of the Mandela Capture Site with its new museum and renowned sculpture of Mr. Mandela by Marco Cianfanelli. In 2020, he was invited to judge the prestigious International Color Awards alongside panels from major international culture institutions, galleries, and media houses. We have hundreds of people attending the program today from around the nation and even the globe. We will have time for a short audience Q&A at the end of the program. We will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Welcome, Christopher Till.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa, where I know it's lunchtime for you, but it's dinner time for me. But what a pleasure to be able to share with you the thoughts and ideas around Nelson Mandela, the principal character in the exhibition that you have in your museum. The exhibition was developed by the Canadian Museum for Human Rights together with us, the Apartheid Museum. And we are delighted to see that that exhibition has managed to reach you in Illinois at the Holocaust Museum and Education Center. And what a privilege it is to be able to give an insight into some of the aspects of Mandela, who in eyes of the world is often seen as an icon of our times, and there's often a tendency to elevate him to the status of a saint. Mandela himself would not appreciate such an accolade. As he saw it, a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying. Now, the Apartheid Museum is one which sits in Johannesburg. It is an award-winning building which was designed by a group of architects led by Jeremy Rose, and it is situated between Johannesburg City and Soweto. So it's significant in the sense that it's almost a bridge between the understanding of the past and the charting of the future, so to speak. The Apartheid Museum is situated in a garden, as you can see here. This is a winter landscape, so it's rather dry. And we receive many visitors, international visitors, as well as local visitors and many school children. Our objective is to ensure that the foundation on which we move into the future is on the understanding of where we've come from, and what we show is the chronological history of the rise and fall of apartheid. And within that is an exhibition of Nelson Mandela. Now, that exhibition was developed for his 90th birthday as a temporary exhibition. Well, it's still there, and we've had to build an extension to the Apartheid Museum to allow us to do other exhibitions in the space which is now occupied by the Mandela exhibition, which a version of which you have in your own museum. The collaboration with the Canadian Museum in Winnipeg of Human Rights was a wonderful process where the nucleus of the exhibition and some of the slides I'll be showing you and talking to you about formed the exhibition which they have curated with some of our assistants. The slide in front of you is the entrance to our museum, and it says blancas, which means whites, non-blancas or ni blancas, non-whites on the other side. One moves into this museum arbitrarily or once you've received a ticket, and you move into a space which separates you, because in fact that was what at the heart of apartheid was discrimination and separation. Now the exhibition, which is still in our museum, we broke into a number of chapters, carrying Comrade Leitzman. Now this image is an introductory panel to theme 1, and what it does embodies a clash of cultures with competing centers of power. On the one side is a white magistrate symbolizing a Western Christian values and practices, and on the other, a black headman symbolizing traditional African principles. Both have sticks that emphasize their authority. Mandela had to develop a synthesis of both of these streams of world views, as do many South Africans still today. So Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born into circumstances as tenuous as they were modest. He was born in the tiny village of Mvezo in the remote and beautiful part of the Cape Colony, which today is an area, a part of the eastern province of South Africa. The Cape Colony was ruled by the British, who had defeated the traditional leaders of the area in the long and bloody war. Mandela was given the name Rolihlahla, which means pulling the branch of a tree, or more colloquially, troublemaker. In many ways, his name mirrored his life. Mandela's father, Mpakanyakiswa Mandela, was chief of the village, and you can see him in this panel on the left in his traditional garb. A man of power and social standing. However, his authority was subject to the authority of the colony. Mandela's mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was the third wife of the chief and a convert to Christianity. You can see in the image next to him. From the beginning of Mandela's life would be shaped by the opposing forces of modernity and tradition, of the ancestors and the state. His ancestral roots were deeply embedded in the Tembu people and the Madiba clan. Nkosani Fanny converted to Christianity and had her son baptized as a Methodist. Here we begin to see Mandela beginning a journey where he engaged with both the traditional values of his father and the Western values bestowed upon him by the church and Western education. Mandela's mother, Nkosini Fanny, as I've said, was the third wife of Katla Henry Mandela, and the circumstances forced her to move first from Kunu, and you can see this beautiful landscape in the Eastern Cape, and then after the death of his father, to Mkekezeni, which was known as the Great Place, where he became the ward of the Tembu regent, Jongintaba, a powerful leader in the area who had managed the transition from traditional life to becoming part of the colonial machinery. This is in Jongintaba, you can see there, in Jongintaba rather, you can see him on the left, and this is a house on the site which still exists, where under the tree, Mandela would sit and listen to the processes of traditional justice at the Great Place. And he has spoken about how his rural background had a profound influence on his life. Here he was steeped in Xhosa culture and traditions. He believed that his experience of growing up, working and playing with groups of people taught him the value of collective effort. This was strongly reinforced when he underwent his initiation ceremony together with his friend Justice, who was the son of the regent, and other boys from the area. They were all circumcised together when they were 16. After the initiation, Chief Mtaklini spoke of the young men. Here sit our sons, young, healthy, and handsome, the flower of the Xhosa tribe, the pride of our nation. We have just circumcised them in a ritual that promised manhood, a promise that can never be fulfilled, for we Xhosas are all black South Africans and are a conquered people. Well, at first, Mandela felt that Chief Melikweli was wrong to cast such a dark shadow on these festive celebrations. Later, he would fight to achieve justice for these conquered people. Having excelled at school, and this is an image of school he went, which was a Western education, missionary teachers, one of few black men of his generation who he would manage to get to university, into a college for black men attended by the elite of Southern Africa. And the images you see to the right, which show some pictures of him as a boy in the school picture, so to speak. This is the university which educated many African leaders at the time, and was there as a university for people, for black people, and as I've said, for many of the leaders and future leaders of African countries in the area. But Mandela was expelled from Fort Hare because he bucked the system and he refused to bow down to certain of the rules, regulations, and practices which were being exercised at the university. John Gintaba, the regent, was furious and decided that Mandela and Justice, his son, would enter into arranged marriages. The young men were horrified at this and decided to run away to the far-off city of Johannesburg, where they both got jobs as security guards on a mine. At a stroke, Mandela had abandoned his prospects of becoming a powerful local leader and destroyed his future, or so it seemed. But Johannesburg was to offer a different destiny. Mandela's move to Johannesburg really changed the course of his life and career. He acknowledged this when he said, "If I had strayed at home, I would have been a respected chief today. I've had a big stomach, and lots of cattle and sheep." Now, the next step in Mandela's long walk to freedom, so to speak, was his move into a political awareness. When he got to Johannesburg, he knew very little about politics, and this image of the next chapter, which is Comrade, in 1952 during the Defiance campaign, which was a campaign defying the rules and regulations of apartheid South Africa. He is at the center stage and flanked by two of his comrades, Dr. Yusuf Dadu, president of the South African Indian Congress and senior member of the South African Communist Party, and Dr. James Moroka, leader of the African National Congress. The lack of opportunities for a black man in the city, and especially not for the indignities that he was subjected to in his daily life in Johannesburg, is what he fought against. Johannesburg in the 1940s was a vibrant and cosmopolitan place. Blacks were restricted to living in certain parts of the city as the authorities tried to balance the need for migrant labor with their desire for white domination. In black townships, an urban culture had quickly grown, and this included a new culture and expression and a vibrant nightlife. It also included a growing political culture led predominantly by the African National Congress, the ANC, a black nationalist organization started in 1912 in opposition to colonial legislation which removed land ownership from the black majority. Township life was also precious. And when I say precious, it was also precarious. There was no electricity and limited water supply. Housing was scarce and overcrowded. Mandela found himself in Alexander Township in Johannesburg, And Alexandra Township was one of the few areas in South Africa where Africans could acquire freehold property. Although Mandela was living in poverty in a single room and was confined with loneliness and frustration, he came to regard Alexandra as the dark city, as it was known, as his home. He said, "Up until that moment of my arrest, I regarded the township as my home, in which I had no specific house, and Orlando, where my wife and children still live, as a place where I had a house but no home." Alexandra housed a diverse community which was politically conscious with strong sense of solidarity. Initially, Mandela was not interested in politics. All of this was to change when he witnessed the 1943 bus boycotts. Increasingly, he also came into contact with a number of politically minded people who influenced his thinking. His friendship with Walter Sisulu, a young estate agent and a member of the ANC, led to a meeting with Anton Mbebe, the fiery Africanist who was to become the leader of the ANC Youth League in 1944. During his sojourn at the Wits University, where he enrolled to complete his law degree, he met a number of members of the Communist Party. Although not attracted to communism, Mandela enjoyed attending their meetings. It was his first experience of meeting whites who were totally divested of color consciousness. When Mandela joined Lembede's, to see the large image in front of you here, informing me, this was the start of his lifelong struggle against the injustices of apartheid. Mandela was influenced by a number of political events in the 1940s. Among these was a strike of 60,000 black workers in 1946 and the passive resistance campaign of South African Indians in the same year. These events demonstrated the power of mass resistance. In 1948, a whites-only election brought the National Party to power, along with its policy of apartheid, the separation of the races in all aspects of life, and the intensification of white domination. The stage was set for a showdown between an increasingly powerful and aggressive form of white rule and the rising of political consciousness of urban blacks and their allies. It was the ANC Youth League responded to the state's tightening grip called
Christopher, if you could reshare your screen again, it looks like it
Okay.
might have just came down.
Am I back on again? Share. There we go.
Perfect.
So it was the ANC Youth League that responded to the state's tightening grip, called for a program of action based on non-violent confrontation. From this point on, Mandela became immersed in the politics of the ANC. The ANC became his family, with his own family taking a back seat. This is underscored in an interview in 2000 with US TV host Larry King, asking him, "What happened to your ego?" To which Mandela replied, "My ego is shared by all men and women of the ANC. It does not belong to any one individual." During the 1950s, Mandela was leading the ANC in decisive campaigns against the apartheid regime, but he was to pay a heavy price for this. He was slapped with a myriad of banning orders ranging from a few months to 5 years in 1956. This prevented him from attending any gatherings, political or otherwise. He was also not allowed to be in the company of more than one person at a time. His political involvement placed a strain on his marriage to Evelyn Masse, and they eventually divorced. He subsequently married Winnie Mandela. And Mandela had a passion for boxing, and he used to train for 90 minutes a day at Orlando Gym in Soweto during the 1950s. His second wife, Winnie, would often come and watch him practicing. Boxing was not merely the black majority #1 sport, drawing vast and varied audiences. It was also an actively demanding, excellent form and showmanship. It suited Mandela in every respect. Why can't I change this? Then one sees the rise of apartheid with the strike in 1946, which I mentioned, where 60,000 black miners went on strike. And Mandela was impressed at the capacity of the African Mine Workers Union to organize these actions. and the continued repression of people, as you can see in some of the images, the restriction of people moving from one area to the next because they had to have a pass. And if you didn't have that pass, you would be manacled and thrown in jail and moved back into the areas where you came from. So there was a restriction of movement of people and a restriction of the ability of free activity between peoples. There was the petty apartheid, where the life of Black South Africans was so completely different from white South Africans. And here you see an image, caution, beware of natives, where people were seen as second-class citizens and were subjected to daily indignity in their daily lives. An image here of his home in Soweto, where his wife lived, and here we get to the next chapter, which is leader. And the image introducing this theme shows Mandela, who was operating underground at the time. He was hiding from the police, making a surprise appearance at the All Africa Conference in March 1961 in a town, Zulu Natal, near Durban, called Pietermaritzburg. The police were looking for him, but he arrived here in his sartorial elegance, in his suit, and commanding a presence in that All Africa Conference in 1961. At this conference, he called for a national convention to plot a new path for South Africa. Mandela, now president of the Transvaal, one of the four provinces of the then Union of South Africa, is every inch the leader, towering above his comrades, commanding respect, bridging the more conservative old guard and the more militant young guard. In the early 1950s, Black resistance to apartheid began to gather momentum, and Mandela found himself at the center of a rising tide of protest. In May 1952, Mandela joined the organizing committee of the Defiance Campaign, a campaign of non-violent mass resistance to apartheid laws organized by the ANC and its allies. Tens of thousands of people were drawn into activities which involved deliberately defying unjust laws and suffering the consequences. Mandela was appointed volunteer-in-chief, and he traveled the country urging people to break unjust laws en masse and to court arrest. Together with his comrades, he devised a system to set up committees street by street, allowing people to be mobilized quickly to respond to calls for resistance. It was called the M Plan. He was already a leader and seen as a leader in the ANC, and he took the position comfortably. At a meeting in Port Elizabeth in 1952, he actually said, "One day I will be the first Black president of South Africa." Due to the banning orders, Mandela was not able to attend the Congress of the People in 1955 in Soweto, where the Freedom Charter was presented. And this came about by collection of ideas of what the people of the country might think would be the founding document which would chart their lives going forward. It was presented at this Congress of the People in Soweto. Mandela was not there, but he had to watch the proceedings over a fence at a distance because the police were still looking for him. This important document, based on the demands of the ordinary people of South Africa, set out a vision for South Africa as a democratic state in which all races would be equal and in which the wealth of the country would be shared. On reviewing the charter, Mandela was moved by the response of the people. It was humbling to see how the suggestions of ordinary people were often far ahead of those of the leaders. The government deemed the Freedom Charter to be a communist document which called for the overthrow of the state. As a result, 156 people, including Mandela, Oliver Tambo, and Walter Sisulu, were arrested under the suppression of the Communism Act in 1956 and charged with treason. After a prolonged trial lasting nearly 5 years, the accused were found not guilty. 1960 was an epic year in South Africa's history. The Pan-African Congress, PAC, a rival organization to the ANC, organized a series of mass protests against government requiring that all Black people carry a pass, a document giving them limited permission to spend time in urban areas. Without a pass or in contravention of their pass conditions, was automatically jailed. As at a protest in Sharpeville, south of Johannesburg in March 1960, the police opened fire on an unarmed crowd, killing at least 69 people, many of whom were shot in the back. A major crackdown followed. Within weeks, the ANC and the PAC were banned and mass arrests took place throughout the country. The Sharpeville massacre was a turning point in the struggle against apartheid. Both the ANC and the PAC went into exile. In June 1961, Mandela himself was briefly arrested and then went underground, living the life of a fugitive, wearing different disguises and moving from one safe house to another. While Mandela was underground, he gave a secret interview in ITN television, which he mooted for the first time the possibility of armed struggle. This idea came to fruition when Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation, the ANC's military wing, also known as MK, was formed in December 1961. And Mandela appointed commander-in-chief. For some time, it was rather awkward because just 6 days before, the head of the ANC, Albert Luthuli, had received the Nobel Peace Prize in Norway. In January 1962, Mandela left the country illegally and visited several countries in Africa seeking finance, military training, and weapons. He made contact with liberation movements all over the continent and learned a great deal about guerrilla warfare. In Morocco, he met the Algerian liberation movement in exile. He then went on to London to meet Oliver Tambo and to convince him of the need to adopt an armed struggle. He learned much about strategy, tactics, and revolution on this trip, which he took back to his comrades in South Africa. The MK cadres, the Umkhonto we Sizwe cadres, must be taught that the revolution was not just a question of pulling a trigger and firing. It was an organization that was intended to take over political power. That is what we stressed, said Nelson Mandela. Then on his return to South Africa, he was arrested in 1962. The rest of the MK command was arrested at Lily's Leaf Farm. The images here firstly show him bearded underground and hiding from the police. And here is Chief Albert Luthuli receiving his Nobel Peace Prize, which, as I just mentioned, became something of an embarrassment in the sense that Mandela, from his trip into Africa, came back into South Africa, and he went to meet Chief Albert Luthuli at his home in KwaZulu-Natal to report back on what he had managed to achieve while going out of the country to sensitize other African countries on what the ANC was trying to do in South Africa. So there was the Treason Trial, which came about by the rest of the MK's high command, who were arrested on a small holding just outside Johannesburg in Rivonia in 1962. They were all charged with sabotage, which carried the death sentence in what was known as the Rivonia Trial. In Britain, the anti-apartheid movement and the International Defence and Aid Fund, the IDF, set up international campaigns for the release of the Rivonia trialists and again the imposition of the death sentence. This shows you an image of Winnie Mandela, his wife, at that trial, coming down the steps. And one of the most haunting and extraordinary speeches was Mandela's speech from the dock during the Rivonia trial, where the verdict was given and sentence was passed. And what you hear is Mandela speaking to that sentence. And he said, "I have fought against white domination. I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. In June 1964, Mandela and 7 other key ANC leaders were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. In fact, Mandela would spend altogether 27 years behind bars. Those sentenced to life imprisonment were Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Ahmed Kathrada, Raymond Mhlaba, Henry Mlangeni, and Elias Motsoaledi and Dennis Goldberg. The image here is the house at Lily's Leaf Farm, where that high command were arrested. Mandela was not there. Some people mistake that fact. He was not there. But the high command was arrested there, but they found documents in the house which implicated Mandela. It's another image of it today, where it's a museum, and you can see some of the outhouses at the back where Mandela was living and pretending to be a gardener. These are some images of the police in that Lily's Leaf house, the actual security police when they went in to arrest them all, and what they found when they were there. But Mandela was arrested not in Lily's Leaf. He was arrested in a small town called Howick, which is not terribly far from Durban, because Mandela had come back from his Africa trip, where he'd gone into Africa, as I've said, to sensitize leaders in African countries to what the ANC was fighting. He came back underground. He went to report to Chief Albert Luthuli, who had to say, but you know, Mandela, I've just been awarded the Peace Prize, but nod, nod, wink, wink. If you wish to move into a space of armed resistance, well, you would have to do that, and rather gave him the go-ahead, the tacit agreement to start Umkhonto we Sizwe. But on his way back to Johannesburg in a motor car with a white colleague, Mandela was posing as the chauffeur, but on the return trip going back up to Johannesburg, Mandela in fact driving, and the police stopped him just outside the town of Howick, and he was arrested and he disappeared from public view for 27 years. And where he disappeared to was to Robben Island. And this panel shows you Mandela actually rather on Robben Island. And it shows you him leaning on his spade with a hat and sunglasses. And the prisoners were required to do menial work, but they were also required to go into the quarry, the limestone quarry, and to chip away in the quarry, quarrying limestone. And those sunglasses were made possible by Helen Suzman, who was the only candidate of the then Progressive Party in Parliament as a woman. And she used to visit Robben Island regularly, and she petitioned for Mandela to be able to receive sunglasses against the glare of that bright white limestone which they were having to endure in Robben Island. So you can see him here as the prisoner in the garden. And Mandela was not simply a prisoner, but the most famous political prisoner in the world. He's angry in this photograph. His body language is defiant, making a mockery of the spade in which he leans. The garden is barren area full of stones. Mandela and his comrades endured very harsh and isolated circumstances in Robben Island. Their suffering was as long as it was intense. Robben Island, a small and barren island off the coast of Cape Town, offered them a tantalizing view of the city without any prospect of escape. The prisoners, the elite of African society, were kept in isolation cells from each other, except during exercise periods. As I've said, they were made to labor daily in the lime quarry, to suffer intense cold and eat minimal quantities of terrible food. For the first 9 years, they had no access to hot water, just a bucket for a toilet. A harsh code of punishment hung over them at all times. And during his incarceration, Mandela penned many letters to his loved ones, compatriots and prison authorities and government officials. Initially, he was only allowed to write and receive one letter of 500 words every 6 months. These letters would often be censored, many of which would never reach their intended destinations. And you can see here an image of the entrance into Robben Island, where the heading here says Robben Island University. And the prisoners often speak of how they use their experience in prison to firstly study, firstly speak amongst themselves and plan and plot. And in fact, it was, while being a dreadful incarceration, was a moment of bringing these comrades together in plotting a future. But it was the personal loss of freedom and separation from his family that proved exceedingly painful for him. In the early years, he was restricted to one letter every 6 months from his wife, Winnie Madisikela Mandela, and only one visit every him with joy, but also reminded him of his inability to be there for Winnie during her painful struggle against the apartheid regime. His young children, Zinani and Zinzi, were forbidden to visit him for many years until they reached the age of 16. There was the loss of the family members in quick succession. His mother died in 1968, his son in 1969. This left Mandela heartbroken. His requests to attend their funerals were denied. Filled with grief, he wrote to a friend. Then came 68 and 69 when the sky suddenly fell on me. I lost both Tembi and Ma, and I must confess the order that had reigned in my soul almost vanished. Excuse me. The image on the right is Mandela with his son, who died, and he was unable to attend the funeral. There was, however, internationally, obviously, an anti-apartheid movement across the world. And there were many demonstrations and even concerts demanding the release of Nelson Mandela. And this was one of them on his 70th birthday tribute. Although Mandela and his comrades saw prison as a site of struggle, they fought against their restrictive conditions from within the prison. Just as the ANC and its allies fought from outside, Mandela made a point of always being polite to the warders, and later began to advise them on family and legal matters. Over the years, they won many rights, including the opportunity to study, improved family contact, better nutrition, and more access to information from the outside world. Although they slept in separate cells, Mandela and other Rivonia prisoners spent much of their days together. Close before they were now in prison, they now became family. In addition, Robben Island began to fill up with new political prisoners. Mandela was famously said that the prison authorities' greatest mistake was to keep them together, for together our determination was reinforced. Prison life changed Mandela. Mac Maharaj, a fellow inmate of Robben Island, who became a close friend to Mandela, observed that as he had been living through prison, his anger and hatred of the system had been increasing, but the manifestations of that anger had become less visible. Mandela learned patience. He learned to rise above the cruelty of his captors. He drew strength from his fellow prisoners. In the decade that Mandela spent in prison, ordinary people in South Africa became increasingly angry towards the apartheid government. In the 1960s and early 1970s, the state was able to keep a lid on protest through arrests and banning and harsh police actions. To pressure on the regime in 1960, the boycott movement Britain launched an international boycott of apartheid goods. As the apartheid struggle escalated inside South Africa, the boycott movement grew into a global campaign for total isolation of the country. This included a sports, cultural, and consumer boycott, an arms embargo, and economic sanctions. From the early 1970s, the new waves of resistance to apartheid were met with brutal repression. Thousands were detained and tortured, and Umkhonto we Sizwe recruits were sentenced to death. In Britain, the anti-apartheid movement and the International Defence and Aid Fund campaigned for the release of all political prisoners under the banner of Southern Africa and the Imprisoned Society. By the mid-1970s, a younger generation was beginning to stir, and in 1976, the school children of Soweto led the way with a massive protest against the government's decision that education for Africans should be conducted in the Afrikaans language. When police opened fire on the protest, it turned into an uprising spreading quickly from Soweto throughout the country. In the ensuing weeks, some 1,000 people were killed by police, many of whom were children. In 1982, after 20 years on Robben Island, Mandela and 3 of his comrades were sent to Pollsmoor prison in Cape Town, where Mandela felt much more isolated and almost required surgery on his prostate. It was a lonely time. But outside the prison gates, pressure was building up for the release of Mandela and other prisoners, and for an end to apartheid. In 1987, the government decided to move Mandela to a cottage in the grounds of another Cape Town prison known as Victor Verster. The government by now believed that Mandela would eventually come to play a role in negotiated settlement. That he have a halfway house to a prison. He began to receive more visitors, and by the late 1987, he began to have contact with allies and even the government leaders. Effectively, he started negotiating the end of apartheid from inside the prison cell. It is worth remembering that at the time, it was a crime in South Africa to display a photograph of Mandela or to quote him. After a decade of imprisonment and isolation, Mandela was poised not only to return to society, but possibly to lead it. The image here shows Mandela with Winnie Mandela as they were released from Victor Verster prison. And what a most amazing and momentous day that was, because nobody knew what Mandela looked like. They only had images of him as a much younger man, and here he emerged after 27 years in jail. He went straight to a balcony of the town hall in Cape Town, and this theme is Negotiator, and it shows Mandela addressing thousands of people on the balcony of the city hall overlooking the Grand Parade in Cape Town on the day of his release on the 11th of February 1990. It was his first speech in 27 years. How did Mandela get to be a free man addressing the people of Cape Town, South Africa, and the world? This much anticipated moment was broadcast around the world. And if you look on the left of him, and in fact on his right, you can see Walter Sisulu peering around behind him. And on the right-hand side, you can see our current president, Cyril Ramaphosa. In the 1980s in South Africa was a period of major upheaval. The young lions, the youth, had heeded the call of Oliver Tambo, leader of the ANC in exile, to make the township ungovernable. Campaigns by the United Democratic Front, the UDF, an umbrella movement within the country of hundreds of civic church students, workers, and other organizations opposed to apartheid. And COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, launched in 1985, pushed the apartheid regime to rethink their position. At the same time, a huge international movement was built up demanding the release of Mandela and other political prisoners at that time. Mandela being faced with the resistance and repeated calls for his release, P.W. Botha, the president at that time, offered to release Mandela on conditions that he renounced violence. Mandela released a statement which was delivered by his daughter Zinzi to a packed stadium in Soweto. These now famous words were greeted with overwhelming cheers. I cherish my freedom, but I care even more for your freedom. I cannot and will not give any of undertaking at a time when I and you, the people, are free. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated. I will return. So he did return, but he was showing his ability to negotiate as a negotiator and as somebody who had the ability to move beyond just an armed conflict and violence into being in a space to be able to negotiate the future of this country. Then we see here an image of Cadessa, which was the forum for this negotiated settlement. Mandela now a free man, the ANC now unbanned. All political parties who had been banned were now able to engage in this dimensional discussion and for a new future for South Africa. And I think that this was a moment where we as South Africans were in a space where there was extreme violence still taking place in 1990 to 1994. And in the midst of it here was Mandela as the negotiator, and on the left-hand side, F.W. de Klerk, the president of South Africa, where they were trying to find common ground. And it was not very easy for both of them because both of their constituencies were fractious in many respects, and they had to move between that fractiousness to come to a moment of where we could move into a space to have an election. This is actually the motor car on his release that was built by the workers of the Mercedes-Benz factory who gave of their time for free, and the Mercedes company gave the parts to create a motor car period of moving towards his final swearing in as president of South Africa after the 1994 elections, which was the most extraordinary, momentous event with lines and lines and lines and lines of people around the block waiting for hours to vote for the first time for the new president, Nelson Mandela. And here he is being sworn as our president. And there at the Union buildings, the South African Airways flying over. I was very lucky to be at the Union buildings on that very day. But Mandela had many challenges to face. And those challenges he met as the new leader of South Africa, and he had to deal with the fractiousness of a nation that had been through such trauma, which he did with great authority and began to rebuild South Africa. And then the last chapter is statesman. Mandela was inaugurated as the first president of a democratic South Africa on the 10th of May, 1994. And he was confronted with these enormous challenges. The outset, Mandela made it clear that he would only serve a single term as president, preferring to lay the foundation for a younger generation to build on. Mandela was concerned to establish a truly democratic society based on firm constitutional grounds. He presided over the adoption of one of the most democratic constitutions in the world. Its equality clause serves as an example to all who aspire for a just society. And here is a quote: "The state may not unfairly discriminate against anyone on grounds of race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, language, and birth." So Mandela focused on building a united nation through a number of high-profile interventions. And here you see him in a rugby jersey. Rugby was essentially a white sport in South Africa, and the World Cup, which was held in South Africa at a particular moment in 1995, Mandela walked into that stadium wearing a rugby jersey. And the crowd stood up on their seats and they started roaring and chanting, "Mandela, Mandela, Mandela, Nelson, Nelson, Nelson." And it was a turning point to show how this essentially white audience in that stadium gave authority and stood as citizens for their newly elected black president. And that was a moment of reconciliation in our country. And it was a moment where it brought the country together in the most extraordinary way around a sporting event.
Hey, Christopher, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. We got about 10
Fine.
minutes left, and we
Yeah.
got a lot of great questions I want to get to before we run out of time, if that's okay with you.
Yep, I'm to wrap up. So one country, one team. And here he is as an international statesman on the world stage. And everybody has grasped and embraced Nelson Mandela as the embodiment of what freedom can mean and what freedom should mean. And it's extraordinary that one human being can stand in that iconic position. And one of the moments in my life, which I will treasure always, is to bring Nelson Mandela to the Apartheid Museum at a particular moment, and in a golf cart drive him around the exhibition of his life in the Apartheid Museum, literally to say, Mr. President, this is your life. And the only thing you could really say, he was not concentrating on anything to do with himself. He was concentrating on the characters in that exhibition, and he was commenting on of those individuals and saying, well, there's this one and there's that one and there's the next one. But he was not concentrating on himself. He has an image of the exhibition or another exhibition at the South Bank in London that we held recently. And the last little bit I'm going to show you is the new museum there, which you can see in the background. And here is this sculpture made out of 50 steel poles that, as you walk down towards them, moves into this image of Nelson Mandela, where he disappeared for 27 years and he reappears as you move towards that sculpture. And here is a wonderful image of Nelson Mandela as this man of humanity, this man of pure and utter responsibility in being able to bring South Africans together around a process of reconciliation. Unfortunately, we are back into a space where there are many problems in our country and many issues, and cracks have appeared, but we all can still look to Mandela as a leader that we should acknowledge as a world icon, which he certainly would not do himself. I'll have to leave it there. I'm sorry if I've run a bit over my time. Thank you.
No, no problem at all. Thank you for your presentation. The first question I want to get into is, what part of Mandela's legacy inspired you the most?
Well, I think his ability to move beyond the trauma that he suffered, to move from being a fighter and guerrilla into being a man of peace and reconciliation, and someone who has the ability to draw people around him and to inspire him. And that inspiration certainly is very much part of what I cherish, and I think many people around the world cherish.
Okay. Can you speak to what led to Mandela's release from Robben Island?
Well, I think firstly, it was a realization by the white government that they were not able to maintain the separatist apartheid process in the face of world opinion and also the internal ramifications, uprisings, strikes, and resistance that was being felt within the country. And they were able to move beyond their own constituency, many of whom were exceptionally conservative and wanted to fight to the death, and come to a table and meet a man who they had learnt to respect while in prison. And when they engaged with him, they were astonished to find how extraordinary Mandela was, and how he was prepared to move towards that space of reconciliation And that led to him being released, and the negotiation process, as I showed, which took 4 years and wasn't easy at the time. There were many, many pitfalls in those 4 years, but we came out at the end with this man as the president.
Okay. Can you comment on the United States CIA involvement in Mandela's arrest?
Yes, well, there was always that suspicion, and the end game in that was that an individual who was a member of the CIA on his deathbed a couple of years ago admitted that in fact they were responsible for tipping off the South African police that he was in KwaZulu-Natal at the time, and he was returning from the meeting with Chief Albert Luthuli, leading to his arrest at Howick in the space that I showed you earlier on.
Okay. And what was Mandela's relationship to the Communist Party?
That has often been discussed. And what one needs to understand that the Communist Party at the time was working with the ANC and supporting the ANC in trying to achieve its goals, and was instrumental in organizational elements in that assistance. Mandela was never signed up as a member of the Communist Party, and he himself said that while he had many comrades who were communists, like Joe Slovo and many others, he himself did not necessarily subscribe to that political doctrine.
Okay. And who had to carry the ID cards? Was it everyone or just certain classes of people?
Every black person, initially males, but then ultimately females, had to carry a pass. And that pass ruled your life. Because if you lived in the rural area and you wanted to come and work in Johannesburg, you had to get that pass endorsed to say that you were allowed to come to Johannesburg to work. And your employer had to sign off to say that you were employed by him or her. And if you did not carry that pass, the police patrols, if you did not have that pass, would arrest you and throw you in jail. So it was a method of control, and every black person had to carry that pass.
Okay. And last question. What is the current political and social situation like in South Africa today?
Well, unfortunately, South Africa has moved from the moment of Mandela magic and the years that Mandela was president into more recent tribulations and trials in our country, where the political process and the ruling party has come under extreme pressure from a variety of positions. The former president, Jacob Zuma, is under investigation for all sorts of corruption crimes. So we've moved into a space of tension in South Africa. And sadly, I have to say, as director of the Apartheid Museum, that there is certainly a rise of racial tension in our country again. And that's why the Apartheid Museum is such an important institution to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And my deep sadness is to say tonight that we had to close the Apartheid Museum last Monday, temporarily, inverted commas, because we do not have the visitorship that we require to keep the doors open. We do not have the school children coming because of COVID-19. And we are in a very delicate stage of our existence in trying to survive, because we need to bring to the attention of South Africans how valuable and how important our history is, and how critical it is that we look at ourselves, that we hold up a mirror and look at ourselves and measure ourselves against what Mandela managed to achieve. So rather sadly, the Apartheid Museum is closed as of this week until such time as we are able to financially stabilize ourselves and reopen.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today. I know it's really late where you are, so I thank you for staying up and participating in this with us today.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to have done so, and I hope that you will and your virtual visitors come and visit you at the Holocaust Museum. Come and look at the museum and reflect on some of the things that I have said, and it's really just scratching the surface. And for you to see what was been trying to tell you this evening in a space and a place where exactly your mission is our mission in many senses of the word.
Absolutely. And for those in attendance, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. If you have a moment, please take time to fill out the survey in the chat. We will appreciate your feedback. Also, please take a moment to look at our upcoming programs. It's accessible through the event page and the link in the chat as well. And thank you. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks again, Christopher. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.